The Eagles offense was already tops in the league in terms of talent on the outside, but the latest trade for yet another first-round wide receiver might be the icing on the cake new OC Kellen needed. Plus, the biggest winners and losers from training camp and who's going to be cut in the coming days. I'm Thomas Mott. This is the Thomas Mott Show. Just when you thought the Eagles' entire offseason couldn't get any more exciting, that GM Howie Roseman had taken his ski mask off and set his sights really on the regular season, the Eagles went out and pulled off another blockbuster move one day after their final training camp practice by trading for Washington Commanders wide receiver Jahan Dotson, plus the Commanders' 2025 fifth-round draft pick in exchange for the Eagles' 2025 third and 2 seventh-round picks. Now, for those wondering at home, this is the Eagles' third-round draft pick that could either be their own or the one they already had from Miami. They had two, and in terms of the seventh-round draft picks, they are the latter of the four Philadelphia has set in 2025. So they still have a third-round draft pick after this trade, and they obviously still have the Reddick third-rounder because that's in 2026, just FYI. Now, if you didn't watch that many Commander games last year, I don't blame you. You're probably an Eagles fan. Here's kind of the lowdown on Dotson. Grew up in PA, already a big plus. Went to Penn State, played alongside Saquon Barkley, who's very excited to have one of his former teammates and honestly someone he really enjoys playing with back on the same side. He averaged 15 yards a catch and 7 touchdowns as a rookie. He was fantastic 2 years ago and is under contract for less than $5 million in cap space over the next 2 years via a rookie deal that gives the Eagles also the ability to exercise a fifth-year option, saving the Birds basically a ton of money the next couple of seasons. So for those keeping track at home, the Birds now have Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Jahan Dotson, all first-round draft picks except for Hurts, under contract for at least the next 3 seasons. I don't know if the fact the Commanders owner also owns the 76ers has anything to do with the recent flurry of trades between the Birds and the Commanders. Thanks Cooper DeJean, by the way. Remember that trade a couple of months ago? All I gotta say is teams really need to stop picking up the phone whenever they see that 215 area code because you're gonna get fleeced. And myself and Josh Davis, we were the first to break this news on YouTube, as we always are. That's our promise to you. Be sure to go ahead and subscribe, because once we get 60,000 subs on this channel, 2 tickets to the Eagles home opener against the Falcons, the Nick Foles retirement game. Plus, as you guys know, a lot of you guys want the Brian Westbrook signed jersey. Let me know down in the comment section, would you rather have the tickets or the jersey? We'll have 2 winners, 1 for each. Again, coming soon when we hit 60K, let me know down below. Now, in terms of the fit, here's where it gets really interesting, right? The biggest selling point for me is Dotson's ability to line up anywhere in any wide receiver position. Last season alone, he played 45% of his snaps inside on the slot and 55% of his snaps outside. This gives Kellen way more creativity to attack opposing defenses and create a really crazy dilemma for defensive coordinators who must now decide if they want a safety or a linebacker or, I guess, a nickel on any of the Eagles' 3 first-round wide receivers. And more, he loves playing 3 receivers. Just look at his first year in Dallas back in 2019. His top 2 pass catchers were, of course, Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. They had 1,000 yards. But then Randall Cobb, forget he was a Cowboy, he finished with 83 catches and 828 yards as their wide receiver 3. Those numbers compared to, I guess, their wide receiver 3 last year in Quez Watkins, it's a pretty big difference. And while sure, Commander fans will argue that Dotson fell off in year 2 last season and was technically losing preseason snaps to rookie Luke McCaffrey and De'Ami Brown, the truth is that Dotson was simply a Ron Rivera era, say that 3 times fast, draft pick that they didn't seem with the new coaching staff to be a fit in the Commanders' new scheme. Maybe he's not going to live up to his first-round wide receiver overall selection. Maybe he turns out to turn a new page in Philadelphia and be great. Time will really tell, but again, you were asking Dotson to go up against the top or second best cover corner on any given Sunday. Now, with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert, again, he's going up against your 3rd best cover guy, your 4th best cover guy. It's going to make a big difference. Now, sure, don't just take my word for it, but how about listening to NFL insider Brian Baldinger break down some film on what the Eagles are getting in Dotson?
Well, the Eagles got their 3rd receiver that they were desperately looking for, and his name is Jahan Dotson. Last year against the Birds, week 8, here he is matched up on the safety right here, Blankenship, and he beats him across the field for 23 yards. Now, in 26 starts, the best game he's ever played was against the Eagles. 8 catches in this game, 108 yards. This with 13 seconds to go in the half to try to get them down in the close field goal range. And coming off the goal line last year against this soft zone that the Eagles played, this 7 cut right here, I don't know, you can't get a whole lot more open than that, but this was the best game he ever played. 8 catches, 108 yards. And off this 3rd and 6 right here, bunch formation again. The Eagles a little slow in picking that up right there. Picks up a first down, and one of his touchdown catches last year came right here in the second quarter. I mean, gets inside the defender right here. Sam Howell puts it right on him. Look, best game, maybe that's why the Eagles were interested. They saw what he did to the Eagles last year, and he torched them in that game. Welcome to Philadelphia, Jahan Dotson, former first-round pick.
Now, of course, this does have consequences for other roster bubble Eagles that we've talked about in the past, but right now it's dramatically changed for guys like Paris Campbell and Ainias Smith. Campbell, I'm sorry to say, it's all but certain he will be cut next week after what was already a lackluster camp that was hindered even worse by a groin injury, and Philly now needs to find a creative way to keep Ainias Smith, a fifth-round draft pick just a couple of months ago, because if he hits the waiver wire after being cut, there's no way another team doesn't sign him. Josh Davis had a great point. Why not take Johnny Wilson, who has a concussion right now and hasn't practiced the past couple of days, put him on IR, short-term IR to start the season. That way you can keep Ainias Smith, that way they both stay on the roster, and then you can figure out the details further down the line. Either way, curious what you guys think of the Dotson trade. I see very few people who don't think it makes sense. I think it makes a ton of sense for Philadelphia, and the only reason you'd be upset is the third-round draft pick, but because you had two, Philly really is getting a super cheap rookie wide receiver, still on that rookie contract, for basically nothing, and gives them the protection if an injury were to happen. I've said it before, Howie is trying to foolproof the 2024 season in terms of getting the right coordinators, in terms of the right draft picks, but also the right depth pieces. If you were to have an injury to Mekhi Becton at guard, you have Tyler Steen and Trevor Keegan behind him to fill the gap. Same goes for cornerback, but wide receiver was the one question. Heaven forbid, knock on wood, A.J. Brown goes down, Devonta Smith goes down. Your next best option would have been Paris Campbell or rookie Johnny Wilson. Now you have a true first-round draft pick who has shown, this is rookie year, some incredible abilities and could fill in for a couple of weeks if, heaven forbid, one of your top two guys were to go down. Now, of course, with the full 16 practice days at the NovaCare Complex officially over, plus one joint practice and two preseason games in the books, training camp, it's officially over for Philadelphia. And with roster cuts looming just a few short days from today, the bubble players have very little room left to prove they belong in Philadelphia, and yet I also think there's going to be some surprise moves in the coming days that gets the Birds down to their 53 players on the roster. Still, though, we can't talk losers of Eagles training camp, people who for sure are going to get cut, without at least mentioning the two biggest winners. First of which, I think has to be Quinyon Mitchell. Like, yes, we all expected Quinyon Mitchell to be good. You spent a first-round draft pick on him. I mean, come on, he was the highest-rated cornerback in this class, but did anyone think a Toledo cornerback would take the Birds defense by storm and spend basically 16 practices getting his PhD in covering elite wide receivers and in the end feel like an inevitable starter at corner and perhaps stud for years? I mean, he hasn't been perfect. No rookie has. Jalen Carter last year, good example. Very similar. Fantastic. Wasn't 100% foolproof, but still, Q's been hungry. He's been getting better each day. And something his mentor Darius Slay mentioned, it's one of the key attributes of this cornerback who is eventually going to take his job.
Yeah, he got a short memory. As you just see now, I don't think it's too short, definitely during camp, because he was looking forward to getting his one-on-one with AJ back from that touchdown yesterday in that big play. So he was hyped on that about that, getting his one-on-one back. So that's what I like about him, man. He's very competitive, just like me, myself. And, he transitioned to the field. So he got short memory, but I know in practice, like, he gets to work in.
The other big winner, though, it's got to be Jalen Hurts. I mean, come on. Put aside yesterday's lone interception, that one blemish on a near-perfect past 4 weeks, according to the media. But all metrics, analysis, people just with their own eyeballs have assessed that Jalen Hurts has had the best training camp of his career. Like Slade said yesterday, you only go as far as your quarterback, and if training camp is any indication of regular season success, I think Jalen's gearing up for his best season yet, which could be even better than what was an MVP caliber year in 2022. He's not been bad in recent training camps. He's just been up and down. Bad days with interceptions, completion percentage not looking perfect. This year, though, that's all been out the window. He's sharp, he's in command, he's taking on a whole new offensive system and seemingly eating it up day after day. Gotta give credit where credit is due. This was a big make-or-break-it year for Jalen Hurts, and so far, through training camp, it's been exactly what Philadelphia has wanted. Now, when it comes to losers, I don't think anyone had a particularly terrible training camp. Like, no one is just gonna get straight-up cut immediately like, this guy stinks. Still, some had some underwhelming past few weeks. For one, I don't know what Philadelphia is going to do with James Bradbury. Like, I don't hate the guy. I don't think he's terrible, but do you really want to use one of your coveted 53 roster spots on a backup safety who was converted from cornerback, who didn't really stand out at all the past few weeks? His preseason game performance against the New England Patriots really told me that if you had to play him, it wouldn't be pretty during the regular season. Now, sure, you keep him on the roster just as a depth kind of, protection if things were to go from bad to worse, maybe, but I really think James Bradberry is going to be one of these players that gets cut, and it's not going to be that big of a surprise in my opinion. Now, another name has to be Eli Ricks, and last year's big winner during camp, again, hasn't a bad season overall during training camp, but the depth at corner makes it so, do you need to have him on the roster? He's 1, 2, 3, 4 injuries away from actually getting playing time with the depth ahead of him. I really, really like Eli Ricks. I don't want to get rid of him. Maybe they find a way, but I'll be very surprised if Ricks ends up making this roster just due to the fact the Eagles have a lot of other better cornerbacks ahead of him. Now, I also need to throw in Tyler Steen. He didn't have a bad training camp, but again, being injured doesn't help. I do think that Jeff Stoutland has very high views of his future, and he should be pretty good overall, but I still have to acknowledge the fact that Steen was all but guaranteed the starting right guard spot heading into camp. Becton was a massive question mark, and then injuries, maybe slightly poor play, and Becton is now the guard and the guard of the future. I'm hoping either way Steen can get healthy, and that way he can be a solid backup just in case the often injured Becton follows historical trends. But losing that battle, it's got to leave a bitter taste for the second-year offensive lineman, of course, out of Alabama. Now, of course, these are just 1 or 2 winners, 1 or 2 losers. There's going to be, tens and tens of Eagles who are cut and then re-signed to their practice squad or just cut outright come Tuesday's afternoon cut deadline. So I decided to sit down with managing editor of Bleeding Green Nation, Brandon Lee Gowton, to go through a lot of players he thinks could make it, could not, also break down the final week of training camp. It's every single bit of training camp information you need from somebody who was actually there. So without further ado, here's Brandon Lee Gowton. Let's start with Jalen Hurts because, of course, as you know, yesterday it was the biggest headline in all of Philadelphia sports. He threw his very first interception, which some people say is a big deal. I think it's kind of a whatever deal. I wasn't at all the training camp practices. You were. Let's just debunk the first myth that Jalen Hurts didn't throw a single interceptable pass until the one yesterday to Darius Slay.
Right, yeah. I think there are 3 instances that really stood out of Jalen Hurts putting the ball in harm's way that really stood out in a big way over the course of training camp. There was a pass earlier in camp that he threw basically right at Keely Ringo. I think that might have been a 7-on-7. Keely couldn't hold on to it. There was another one at the link where Bryce Huff dropped into coverage and had a chance to make the play. Obviously, a defensive lineman, edge rusher, don't have the best hands. I think that one kind of just tricked Jalen Hurts a little bit, which is the point sometimes of dropping an edge rusher into coverage, as much as people usually don't want to see that happen. And there's a third pass in the joint training camp practice against the Patriots where I thought Jalen Hurts kind of put the ball a little bit too far out in front of Dallas Goedert, and the Patriots defenders had a chance to make the play, ultimately didn't. But the fact that I can recall all those examples, and the fact that Jalen Hurts only threw 1 interception in training camp at all is really a testament to just how good of a camp he had.
I think that that's the main takeaway, is not that the Eagles secondary can't get interceptions, or, Jalen's being too conservative, which all these things have been debunked. It's the fact that the Jalen Hurts that you, again, for instance, someone who has been there, seeing him last training camp versus the Jalen Hurts of this training camp, it is dramatically improved just from a camp setting, correct?
Yeah, and also, look, the Eagles only had 1 joint training camp practice against the Patriots, but they picked the Patriots quarterbacks off multiple times, and the Patriots quarterbacks aren't amazing, but still, they did it in that setting. Vontae Maddox had the pick in the preseason game. So we've seen the defense be able to have interceptions at some points, for sure. I just think that it's not a matter of the defense wasn't even close, and Jalen Hurts is just completing passes that are wide open. I think it's a matter of Jalen Hurts was making good throws, better throws against good coverage, and there wasn't much the defense could do about it. And that's not an indictment on them as much as it is, again, a testament to Jalen Hurts.
I want to get to another player who you have talked about a lot, and actually we talked about a lot the first couple of weeks of training camp, as someone who struggled, didn't really stand out, and yet I think things have changed. I want your opinion on this. Also, whenever you come on my show, the comments section always says that Brandon Lee Gowton is a known hater of this player. It's Nakobe Dean, which I disagree with. I know you do as well, but let's just start with this whole notion that Nakobe Dean has dramatically improved the past couple of weeks. True or false?
Yeah, I would not say I'm a hater. I say I'm a realist. Now, obviously, there's a fine line between that. But I think, look, the first 2 years of training camp, I said it with you going into training camp, Nakobe Dean didn't really do much of anything in those practices. And it wasn't just about the injury issues. When he was healthy, there just wasn't much there where he was really popping. And that is in stark contrast of the player he was this summer, especially late in camp here. And look, I still think there are question marks when it comes to him dropping into coverage. I don't, and his size his limited athleticism. I think there are things there I'm still worried about or concerned about, but there's no question when he has been playing downhill, whether that's in coverage, he's able to react to catches that are, made in front of him, or he's able to go downhill as a run defender or as a blitzer. Unquestionably, he's had success in that regard, and I think that's very encouraging, and that earns him a role on the defense. I just think, before we can say, okay, Nakobe Dean is this star player that everyone hoped he would be when the Eagles drafted him, there's still questions to be answered when it comes to dropping back into coverage.
Okay, so you mentioned dropping back into coverage being the weakness, which we've heard a lot the past couple of years. I think most people would agree with you on that, even your most starchest haters, right? But in terms of Zach Bond versus Dean, that's kind of the overall, depth chart matchup here, because Devin White is locked in the number one linebacker spot. Bond continues to be the number two, but Dean's trending upwards. Is that the difference? And again, I'm not there. Is it that Bond is better in coverage than Dean, and so maybe Vic Fangio wants a better coverage linebacker than maybe a better tackling linebacker? You want both, but still, maybe that's the reason why Bond continued to, at least up until yesterday, be with the ones in terms of the linebacker role?
Yeah, I think right now, the way they're handling it, there's been a rotation, linebacker, where it's usually Devin White and Zach Bond is the first up on the first team defense. But with Nakobe rotating in there, with Jeremiah Trotter even rotating in there, I just think that's a position that could also evolve over the course of the season. Just because Devin White and Zach Bond are potentially your week one starters doesn't mean that's going to be the case every game. And also doesn't even necessarily mean they will finish that game with the most snaps played at linebacker. Again, I think there could be rotations. There could also be matchup specific things that the Eagles see and want to kind of adjust. So I think that's kind of an ongoing, evolving situation there at linebacker.
The one other story before we get to some people maybe on the bubble who might be cut, who might make the roster, it's been Quinyon Mitchell. We've talked a lot about Quinyon Mitchell on my show, when you've come on my show the past couple of weeks. I made a statement, I think it was 2 days ago, that it feels like Quinyon Mitchell has been the most impressive rookie Philadelphia's had in a very long time. And I think he's right up there with Jalen Carter's, training camp performance last year, because all we got last year was that Carter is, leagues better than what you would expect a rookie to be. Would you second that as someone who's seen almost every snap of Quinyon Mitchell at training camp, that he is the most NFL-ready Eagles rookie you've seen in your time covering Philadelphia?
Yeah, short of Jalen Carter, like you just mentioned, I would say yes, at least what comes to mind. There's obviously moments where Quinyon, I think, does look like a rookie, or is not an all-pro from the jump, and in part because he's going up against really good wide receivers and A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, and I think, there are times where he can have, again, great coverage, but it doesn't really matter if you're going up against those guys and they're able to make a play, even if you're playing perfect coverage against them, and especially if the throw is good as well from Jalen Hurts, as it often has been. So I've been really encouraged by Quinyon Mitchell. Again, I've pushed back on this idea that I've seen out there that, like, okay, why is he playing in the slot? That's not a good sign for him. I think it's a great sign because it speaks to the coaches want to find a role for him on the field. And it's not about pigeonholing him in there for his entire career. It's about saying, how can we get our best cornerbacks on the field right now? We believe Quinyon Mitchell is one of those guys. And you could be like, well, why isn't it as simple as playing him on the outside? It could be. It could be that he ends up being in that spot. Or I think what the Eagles have been doing a little bit more recently here in camp, where in base defense, when it's only two cornerbacks, it could be Darius Slay and Quinyon Mitchell on the outside. Okay. And then when you're going to nickel, you could have Isaiah Rodgers come in on the outside and then switch Quinyon Mitchell there into the slot.
Makes sense. It's just incredible that he has had this quick of a growth coming in from Toledo. And we knew he was great coming out of the draft. That's why he was drafted so high, but it was still like, how quickly can you lock down A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith? And he doesn't do it every single snap, like you mentioned. Those guys are incredible, but there are more often than not tweets that I'm seeing from training camp of really good rep, Quinyon Mitchell versus Devonta Smith. Oh, look at this, really good rep against A.J. Brown, and it's just very exciting to see. And I agree with you. I think there will be a point this season where he starts to really kind of take over that other cornerback slot, unless Isaiah Rodgers keeps playing well, which he's not done the past couple of weeks. So that remains to be seen. Let's get to some bubble players. How we're going to go with the depth chart, because we're days away from cuts. Obviously, the Saturday preseason game, which we'll talk about, is going to play a big part in that. Wide receiver 3 is something we always bring up. My question for you is this: Paris Campbell, does he actually make the roster or not? Because you keep 5 wide receivers, you keep 6 wide receivers. It really is going to come down to, if they keep Campbell, then someone else is going to go that you would think would stay. I think Ainias Smith might be that option to practice squad. But Paris Campbell hasn't played much. He hasn't done much. Do you think Campbell makes the final 53?
Yeah, I'm torn because he hasn't really done a whole lot, as you just said, and I don't know that you definitely have to keep him on the roster. We might be able to bring him back, especially after week 1, if you don't want to guarantee that
Okay.
salary as a vested veteran. I'm not sure yet. He's getting first team reps. He was as recently as these past couple of days here to end camp, so certainly it could happen, and we don't really even know fully what this wide receiver picture is looking like because John Ross has missed multiple practices now with a concussion. Johnny Wilson, same thing. So there's an injury factor here as well. And then I'm guessing those guys won't even be able to play in the preseason finale on Saturday. We'll see about that. Obviously, that could be a factor. Aniyah Smith, I've had him off of my 53-man projections that I've done for Bleeding Green Nation recently, but I think he's done enough since a really tough start to camp for him where it's not that he's been like amazing or great or a revelation all of a sudden, but he's certainly been a lot less bad and looks a little bit more comfortable. And I think might be clearing the bar of doing enough to not want for Howie Roseman to not want to cut one of his draft picks to at least make the team. Don't think he's ready to play at all, to be clear, as a rookie, but is doing enough to be like, okay, we don't want to give up on this guy after just one training camp. So I think he might actually make the team.
So then let's just take a guess here. Obviously, AJ, Devontae, and I think we both would agree Covey are all the 3 locks. They're the all guarantees.
Yep.
So if they keep 5 or 6, give me your next 2 or 3 if you were GM Brandon Lee Gowton. Like if you had to pick the 5 best receivers you want on the roster, besides the top 3, who would they be?
Yeah, I'm going to put Johnny Wilson in the lock category too, assuming, the injury isn't it's a concussion. I mean, it's hard to know for sure, but let's assume that it's not going to be longer to keep him on IR or anything. That's tough because it's like, okay, I set Aniyah Smith on, and then that puts you at 5 already. So maybe it is 6 here. Maybe they keep Paris Campbell. I still think, trade is in the mix. I don't have any direct information on that, but just logically, it just seems like it feels there's so much uncertainty there that they would just maybe want to be able to add someone, and certainly cut down times gives you more ability to do that. You can see who shakes free. We saw the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson trade, a couple of years ago happen, I think, on cut down day. So there are going to be moves that will be made, and we haven't really seen Howie Roseman active in the trade market yet. That certainly won't last for long, I'm sure. So I'm not really giving you a firm answer here, but I do think ultimately I'm going to, on my next 53-man roster, which will be my last one, I believe, before the cut down itself, I'm going to have the obvious locks in AJ, Devontae, Covey, Johnny Wilson, and then I'm going to put Aniyah Smith on there as well.
Do you think that Joseph Ngata has any chance? Like, is there any chance of him not being a practice squad guy? Because he's going to be on, the practice squad at minimum. But in terms of sneaking in with another good Saturday performance versus the Vikings, yay or nay?
I don't think he's looked good enough in camp. He obviously had a really good preseason game against the Patriots, but I think there's been too many lows in camp for that practice or that game alone to kind of rise him to roster contention. And I still think with his play style, like, he had success, but he's not really separating at all. And that's okay if you're able to win those contested catches, but it's just not something I think that if you cut him, you're going to be able to get him back on the practice squad. I don't think you need to use a roster spot on him.
Okay, there you go. That's exactly another reason why we bring you on, because you're watching training camp reps. A lot of Eagle fans are just watching the preseason game. If you watch that second preseason game, you go, oh my gosh, he's the best receiver out of the other group. You got to keep him. And in reality, the separation, which is a problem for a lot of college wide receivers these days, seems to be, the recurring issue. So that makes sense over there. In terms of the secondary, I think we pretty much know where we're going here. We're not going to have any surprises at cornerback, right? And the surprises would be a Zach McPherson and Eli Ricks. Is there anybody further down the depth chart that's been probably overshadowed because Quinyon and Keeley and Rodgers have been really good that might sneak onto the roster if they want to keep an extra cornerback?
Yeah, I think the bottom of that position's a little tricky to figure out because Josh Jobe, I believe, is the superior special teams player, has been throughout his career, and you kind of even see that when you look at the preseason snap counts. He's playing on that unit a lot more than Eli Ricks is, but I think Eli Ricks has the higher defensive ceiling, which a lot of people would want to go with, and understandably so, and maybe the Eagles even do. But like the problem is, Eli Ricks probably not going to be playing on defense unless things go really wrong and there's a lot of injuries, and you're going to need someone for special teams every week. And Josh Jobe is a really good gunner specifically, so I struggle with that one. Vic Fangio called out Josh Jobe for being a little too grabby there, so don't know what to entirely make of that. If that's very damning and a death knell for him, or it's a case of, hey, we like him, but he has to really work on this one thing. So I guess I'm going to probably have Ricks on just because I'm going to lean with the Eagles going with his upside and potential still. I do think Ricks, as I've said probably previously, maybe even on the show here, that he just makes sense to me as a trade target because I think it's not that he has immense value, but I feel like you could probably get the Eli Ricks version of a wide receiver or some other position where that makes more sense for you just because you have a numbers crunch at cornerback.
Do you have any sort of concern as we flip over to the offensive line here with the injuries so far at guard? Because Josh Davis, the Philly Special Show, we were doing our live show last night, and it feels like the right guard spot is kind of, at least the guard spot in general, is like the cursed position right now. Landon Dickerson spent time injured. Becton injured, came back. Obviously still waiting on Tyler Steen. Trevor Keegan now out. Don't know the extent of that one. Are you concerned at all, or are these just kind of nicks and bruises, and once they're all healthy, then there's enough depth there to make sure it's not like a major flawed position?
I'm concerned with the right guard spot, the interior of the offensive line in general. I'm not like, 10 out of 10 concern level, but let's say 4.5. Like I think there have been issues in pass protection, especially less so in as a run blocking unit, but more so in pass protection. Like my thing with Mekhi Becton has always been, I think it's not like he just stepped up and ran away with the job and was so dominant and so awesome that he sees the right guard job as much as it was Tyler Steen faltered and, was hurt, came back, playing through injury, didn't look totally great, didn't look totally healthy. And I think Becton, again, has done some good things. There have been moments where you're like, that's intriguing. That looks like a guy who can make this conversion from tackle to guard. There, again, reason to be excited, but there are also moments where it's like, okay, that is not a sure thing. This is also a guy who, even if let's say he does translate great, has had injury issues in the past. Yeah. So that is still a question mark there as well. So yeah, I don't think that position is as solidified in terms of confidence level as I would like it to be, as the Eagles would like it to be.
Okay, that, so like I'm watching all the tweets. I'm reading up on what happened yesterday at training camp, for instance, and I think you had a tweet saying 5 or 6 sacks is what it seemed like, a lot of sacks from the defensive line against the offense during 7-on-7s or really 11-on-11s, and you immediately go, oh, Bryce Huff looks good and Jalen Carter, they must be doing great. But all those sacks is what basically I'm hearing from you is more maybe the interior group struggling and allowing internal pressure into Jalen Hurts' face versus the edge guys. Would you agree with that?
It depends. I think it depends. I think there's generally been more interior pressure, but yesterday specifically, Brandon Graham had 2 sacks against Jordan Mailata early in practice. I'm sure BG wanted to have a strong practice. It was his final Eagles training camp practice of his career, wanted to go out on a high note. Josh Sweat had 3 sacks in the practice. I believe it was over the weekend, but that was going up against Fred Johnson. Lane Johnson was not practicing that day as a maintenance day. So, it's kind of, as a whole, I want to say I feel better about the Eagles pass rush unit, and it's not because of just one player, although if it was, it'd be Jalen Carter, but it's more about, I think that group has shown they have enough collective juice there to be effective and get the job done. I don't know that they're going to, again, be the best pass rush in the NFL, but I think they're going to be an above average group. But also, that goes hand in hand with, okay, how much can we count on this offensive line and just how good are they going to be? I don't think it's that they're going to be a bad unit. I don't think that's the case. When you have Jeff Stoutland here, when you have Lane Johnson and the talent that the Eagles do on the offensive line, but it's just a matter of, as Eagles observers, we're so used to this being one of, if not the very best offensive line in the NFL. And, when you lose Jason Kelce, when you have an unsettled right guard situation, you're going to drop off to some extent. And that's the question, is just how much of a drop off is there going to be?
No, it's a great point. It feels like the position groups have kind of switched in terms of, we entered camp and it was like, okay, where's Bryce Huff? What's the pass rush doing? It's a little quiet on the outside. I didn't see Josh Sweat's name mentioned for like weeks, and then all of a sudden he's kind of come alive. And it's the inverse for the offensive line. They get injured a bunch. Becton is like, is it going to be Steen? And then he gets hurt, and then Becton, like, we get excited there, and now maybe he's good but not great, and so there's more interior pressure. It'd be very interesting, and I think that first preseason game is going to be a big teller for a lot of things, but also along the offensive line, just to see how good or bad or mediocre they're going to be. And so I think it's very interesting that you brought that up. Is there any name that we haven't mentioned or no one's mentioned the past couple of days or weeks that you think is pushed to make a roster spot? Patrick Johnson's name pops up in my mind as someone who They got to keep so many guys, but can they find a way to get him on the 53? Is there another name like that we're not really thinking of who will look on the actual final depth chart and go, oh, wow, he made the roster?
I'm really curious to see what becomes of Tristan McCullum, because I think he's done a really good job of flying around out there, both in the preseason games and as a run defender, as in coverage, he's made some plays as well, and in practice as well. And the safety outlook for the Eagles is a little unclear right now because you have Reed Blankenship and CJ back there. We know that much, but beyond that, what do we really know? Because Sidney Brown, as we're recording this, is still currently on the PUP list, and he's missed all training camp. It looks like he's going to miss all 3 preseason games. And to me, I would rather almost be overcautious with him at this point, because if you bring him on PUP into the regular season, he's out automatically for the first 4 games.
Right.
He'll have an early bye in week 5, so you can kind of add that in there as an advantage. And then if he's assuming everything is good, he can return in week 6. And then again, you're not rushing it at all. You're giving him that extra time.
Sure.
Obviously, the downside, if you need him sooner, could be bad, but that might be a risk you just have to take. James Bradberry, it just doesn't seem like he's a safety. It doesn't seem like he totally fits. I think he can, do some safety things in coverage, but as a run defender, and then the mental part of the game, as we saw against the Patriots, just not really seeing things in the correct way, and doesn't play special teams. So that's just not really like the best use of a roster spot to me. Avonte Maddox seems to be transitioning to safety well, but that is, again, a transition, a projection at some level. And then obviously we don't know. Again, I already mentioned Sidney Brown and also Caden Stearns, who the Eagles added but hasn't practiced at all. Don't even know for sure when he's going to be healthy. So there's just uncertainty there. And I feel like it would kind of be unfortunate to me if the Eagles would lose Tristan McCullum, especially, at the expense of keeping James Bradberry, when McCullum is a player who has potential and is younger and maybe could be something more than what they expect. Whereas James Bradberry, I just feel like, what's really the upside there?
Yeah, Bradberry's going to be fascinating to find out what happens, early next week. You cut him. Do you keep him? He's been the second team safety most of training camp so far, which would seem to indicate they want to keep him there, but I don't know. It's gonna be, cut him. Does the team sign him and make him a cornerback again after going through this whole transition? It's going to be an absolute mess. I want to wrap up with this because you've done incredible training camp coverage, Bleeding Green Nation, yourself on Twitter. I really appreciate that. Coming on my show. We'll have you on, obviously, during the season. But when you go into a training camp like this every single year, we have expectations for the Philadelphia Eagles. Are they going to be bad, mediocre, Super Bowl, right? Those seem to be the kind of 3 categories. And I feel like the hype has continued to grow ever since, the Saquon Barkley signing, the Quinyon Mitchell draft picks, and now Jalen Hurts balling out in training camp. Would you, having been at all those training camp practices and, covering the preseason games, would you say now, on the other side of the last month, the Philadelphia Eagles are better than what you expected them to be, or expect them to be better, or they're worse than what you expected them to be?
Yeah, it's a little tougher to gauge than previous years, just from the standpoint of usually we get to see the Eagles end training camp with some joint training camp practices against different teams. And that kind of gives you, a sense of like, okay, where is this team at? And answers some of those questions we have when, is this really about this unit looking good or the other unit looking bad? And we only got to see one of those this year, and it was last week. So it's a little bit tougher to gauge, but generally, I feel pretty confident in saying that, like, I feel better about the team. I feel encouraged about this season just because at the most important thing is the quarterback. And Jalen Hurts, I thought he had his best training camp. I really do. I think there's some people out there who would say 2022 is better. I just don't agree with that. I think this season he looks a lot more advanced as a passer, and I think he looks healthier and faster than ever as a runner. So I feel really good about his outlook entering this season. Knock on wood, the team stayed pretty much mostly healthy. That's really truly the number one thing of training camp, is to avoid massive injuries. They did that. And then I think generally the vibes are positive. I think, we've seen various clips on social media, like the CJ shot for the team meeting and everything. And just little things like the cart with, Hurts and Sirianni and Big Dom. There's been little moments like that we've been able to see. And just the general tenor, I think, of the team has been good vibes, which, that's not everything, because those vibes, I think, can shift in a quick way. Sure. But for now, everything seems to be pointing in a positive direction. And again, I feel good about this team's outlook this year.
Okay, I love it. I feel the same way. I think the vibe thing, you can overblow it very easily, but it's also something that when your team doesn't have the correct vibes, you very easily, can tell, and and we saw that the final 7 weeks of last season. So hopefully things change around. You get the vibes from 2022, where it was like, we feel this team has, the mojo to go ahead and make a deep run, and obviously they did. So, Brandon, appreciate everything you've done. Obviously, all the great coverage on Bleeding Green Nation. I know most people who watch my show are on that website daily. If you're not, check it out. Follow Brandon on Twitter at Brandon Lee Gowton, and I'm sure we'll talk, at length in terms of the actual regular season. So, enjoy the fact you don't have to go to practices every single day now, because I know that is a lot, and we, the fans who don't get to go, appreciate you doing that. So, thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you again soon.